thank you everybody for coming. I know that there's been some interest in this with the Burlington Police Department legislative update for 2021. We were going to have it at the luncheon last month. Unfortunately, that we weren't able to get this in. So Mike has decided, or Chief Luvera has decided to come in and do this for us, so we can, I guess, at this point in time, be educated on the changes that have happened through 2021. So Mike, go ahead and take it away.
Hey, thank you all, and appreciate you all taking some time with me today. I'm going to do the best I can to give you the best information we have, but keep in mind that it has been fast-paced and it's ever changing. So what I have to go through today is kind of a PowerPoint I gave City Council. Some things I'm going to quickly gloss over, and as we go through, if you have questions, shoot those to staff, raise a hand, whatever, and interrupt me as we go. But I think it's important that as part of this, I give you what BPD did to prepare. It's not that we just sat back and did nothing and allowed things to happen to us. We jumped on this very early. My first letter to our elected officials was in December of 2020 before the session started, telling them that I was concerned about some of the things that were being proposed. And then we'll go into some of the effects on the community. We'll talk about future laws that are going to happen here next year as well. So some of the things that I put in my letter, I won't read all of these, I just put them up there so you understand, is again, I was very concerned that they were trying to legislate relationships, and that does not work. Plain and simple, it does not work. There's a thing called procedural justice. It's a philosophy that I believe in. We've instituted at BPD. It works. It's where we should spend our money. And I tried to push them in that direction to little to no avail. I also, again, said that, again, I think that their intentions were right. I just think the language that they used was not. And I think they needed to have more conversations with how their philosophy could actually work on the streets and an officer could use them. And I think that there was a gap there as well. So why was all this stuff being done? Well, the legislative session this year was all about law enforcement reform, because there was a strong perception out there that law enforcement was overstepping in a lot of ways. I had heard throughout the session a lot of data that was being thrown out there. So I spent a weekend going through the data they used. They provided it to me, and I went through them. And this was 2019 lethal force things that law enforcement within the state of Washington was involved in. So there was 35 deaths that were associated with a law enforcement call or response that particular year. In 31 of 35 of those, the person was armed. They were either armed with a replica, a firearm, a pipe, whatever it may be, but the person was armed, which means these are serious events. 31 of the 35. So the idea that everything was an unarmed person is not factual in the state of Washington nor at a national level. There was one of the unarmed incidents where a vehicle was being used to drag an officer. He had no choice, he didn't think, but to shoot and I believe kill did kill the driver. There were 3 incidents that out of all of these that were considered unarmed. And I want to talk about those for just a second. One of those is what I believe to be a suicide by cop situation. Somebody pulls out sunglasses out of their pocket like it's a weapon. The officer responds. It's an unfortunate situation. The other one is somebody that's holding a baby and they are either going to crush the child, stop the breathing of the child. Again, lawful or lethal force was appropriate. And then there's this other one, and we have very little information on it. And it seems as though the system is working because this is an officer where it does not appear lethal force was justified, and that person's been charged with murder, that officer. And so that was it in the state of Washington for 2019. But then I started to hear that in 2020, there was actually 55. So remember, there was 35 in 19. Then the data they started to give was 55 in 20. And so I went through that data, and I won't bore you with all the details, but here's what I found. They had included 10 motor vehicle accidents. One person hit the back of a patrol car while it was stopped at a red light, and unfortunately the driver of the other vehicle died, and they attributed that to a law enforcement caused death. Another one was a house that exploded with 2 people inside. Law enforcement was at the scene. They didn't cause the explosion. There is medical situations that occurred, and there's one subject that ran from law enforcement, later was found, I think the next day, he died after trying to swim in a river. And I would argue that these may be law enforcement calls or we were at them, but I think it gives the wrong image as though law enforcement directly caused these deaths. And I think that talking about that data is important. And believe me, I've shared all of this with our legislators many times. So again, the information is never good. We want 35 to be zero. If we can make it zero, that would be a greater thing. But keep in mind, there's 181,000 arrests that occur in the state of Washington, 181,000 times that a police officer is taking someone into physical custody. Sometimes people resist us. If we look at that number compared to the 35 deaths, and granted, not all 35 were unjustified, but we'll say 35 deaths, 99.98% of the time that we make an arrest, there's no loss of life. 25,000 of those 181,000 arrests are for violent offenses, rape, robbery, murder, those sort of things. And even when we arrest people that are violent people, it's still 99.86% of the time that we do it without having to use lethal force. And then there's 1,900 police officers that are assaulted or were assaulted in 2019. And even looking at that number, 98% of the time where a police officer was being assaulted, did we resort to lethal force. So I say these things for perspective, but I want to give a little bit more perspective. People say, hey, well, how many deaths are there in the state of Washington? There's 58,000, over 58,000 deaths in the state of Washington. There's 56,000 domestic violence calls, right? And you can look at I won't read them all, but you can look at the list. And the other thing I point out is let's not forget that there was also 4 police officers killed that year as well. So I think this helps tell a little bit better story of your police officers are not these rogue, violent people that are out just wanting to wreak havoc on people. It really is not the case. I think that there is a perception issue and it could be further discussed. The last thing I did was this, and then I'll get off of this soapbox. I looked to see, you know what, we make arrests, but how many people does law enforcement contact? Well, the Bureau of Justice Statistics says it's about 24%, somewhere in there, of the population has contact with the police any given year. So in the state of Washington, that 21% of our population is about 1.6 million people. If I took that number again with the 35, not just the one death, but the 35, 99.9978% of our contacts with our public result in no loss of life. I would say that our officers, based on this, are doing a pretty good job. Is there room for improvement? Yes. Do we make mistakes? Yes. Are we perfect? No. But are we doing a relatively good job? I don't think it's as bad as it's been portrayed to be, quite frankly. Okay, questions on that? Let's jump into the new laws as of 21. So 21 was a 105-day legislative session. When the laws were signed by the governor, from that point, we had, I think, 60 days in which to implement, which put start dates for the new laws, July 25th. I'm going to go through some of the highlights here, but there was a tactics bill that came out. They called it a tactics bill. There was lots of things that either Burlington PD already did, law enforcement, it was already a best practice, or it had little to no impact on us. And that's a lot of these things here. It was funny because of this limits the military equipment we can acquire. There were things on there like armed drones. I'm not sure I could even get an armed drone. I don't think law enforcement can, but it was very thorough in what the belief was as to what equipment we could acquire. And so again, I think there was some communication gap, both on the part of law enforcement and lawmakers, there's no doubt. Higher impacts were, in this particular category, it was chokeholds. And it's not just officers going out and using chokeholds, right? I've been in law enforcement for 30 years. I've never had to use a chokehold. But it was the issue that in one law, it totally banned a chokehold that was passed that year in 21. And that same year, there was a law that conflicted directly with the banning of a chokehold. So then we tried to reach out and get clarification from both legislatures, the Attorney General, and our legal advisors. And this is where you hear law enforcement say there's mass confusion. We don't know what we can do and what we can't do. And that's a problem. The bills were passed to try to clarify what law enforcement could do. And a lot of the times, or many times, we found instances where it's conflicting and it really did do more damage than positive. Let me talk about vehicle pursuits for a minute. Back when I started law enforcement, there was very little regulations on vehicle pursuits. We chased people to the end of the earth for whatever reason. It's not the case anymore. We realize that vehicle pursuits are extremely dangerous. They're high risk, not only to the officer, but to the public as well. And so we heavily regulate those. The legislatures didn't think that they were regulated enough. So they came out and said, here are the times you can pursue. You can pursue when there is a violent crime, and they defined what a violent crime was. A sex offense, the person has escaped, or a DUI is what they've established as reasons you can pursue. In addition to that, the officer and a supervisor must have a discussion and discuss if there's any alternatives to the pursuit. And the other one is that the supervisor must authorize and control the pursuit the entire time. Let's see if back here. So on this, the first problem that I've got as chief of Burlington PD is I don't have a supervisor on all the time. So you can imagine if we've got 2 or 3 officers working, there's an incident that occurred and it's a violent offense, that officer still by this law is required to pull over and call his supervisor, get a hold of a sergeant, a chief, one of our commanders at home, and get permission before they can pursue. They could literally witness a drive-by shooting and the car takes off, and they're going to have to, the officer is going to have to stop, go through this process before they can pursue. That is a problem. And I gave that as one of the examples of something that I think is an unintended consequence by the passing of the law. Well, here's Burlington in the last 30 days. We got a call of a guy that was looking at his security camera at his business. And he said, hey, there's somebody that's backed a trailer up to my pickup that's parked at my business and they're trying to steal my pickup. So we get there, we get out to talk to the person that's loading up the pickup. He quickly unhitches the trailer that he's trying to use to load the pickup onto it and backs up and goes back and forth until the trailer unhitches. And then he drives off across the field. Now he's committed a felony, several felonies in fact, but none of them are violent. So it does not allow us to pursue. So we did not pursue that person. We stood there and watched them leave after trying to commit the theft of a vehicle. We had about 2 weeks ago, we had 2 gentlemen that were in a vehicle, suspicious behavior in outside of a known drug house. And our officers got there. As they walked up to the car, there's a handgun sitting in the console in between the seats. The officers are giving commands, telling them don't go anywhere, stop, let me see your hands. The driver puts the car in drive and drives off. Now, the possession of the handgun is not a violent offense by the categories. So the officers were not able to pursue. That case is unsolved. We have not been able to identify who those people are. Had the officer been able to pursue under our old laws and under old policy, they would have at least been able to get a license plate or something that may have been able to give us something to go off of. So right now I've got 2 people that know that they can drive away from the police, and that's when they've got a handgun and a drug pipe sitting in their lap. And then the last one was a serial shoplifter, and it was a person that had been hitting us nonstop. They had loaded up multiple items. Officer gets to their car where they're at, and that same person looked at it and put them in drive and drove away at a high rate of speed. That is one of those that we're going to weigh. Is it worth going after a shoplifter? What's the risk? And I would prefer that we do that based on the totality of the circumstances and what the officer knows at the time, as opposed to a law that says it doesn't fit the category, you can't pursue. And that's where we're at right now. So what I'm saying is we've got officers that are now very well trained, but they're also very frustrated because they realize that we're allowing criminal activity to occur. And that does get troublesome. Questions on pursuits? All right, here we go. Let's talk about use of force. Use of force was one of those things that they really turned upside down. Again, I understand why. They're concerned that law enforcement is overusing their authority. And so they've decided that 25, 30 plus years of laws and case law, they were going to throw out in a sense. and institute a new standard to law enforcement. So if you think about it, this category, use of force, is something that you spend weeks on at the you spend a lot of time training on it, and now it has been changed completely. So we had 60 days in which to retrain officers on the highest risk category we have for the state. The frustrating part that you'll see from me is that the law passed July 25th. Within this law, the Attorney General was given almost a year to come up with a policy. I had 60 days to put out a policy and retrain every one of our officers, and the state's basically the state's leading law enforcement person was given over a year to draft a policy to share with us. That becomes frustrating as well. Yep, so there's the repeal of necessary force to establish the new standard. We need to have probable cause before using force. This will make a little bit more sense to you here in the next couple of slides, but I'll share it this way. If we have to have probable cause before using force, this means that a situation where, let's say, a shoplifter, we get a call of a shoplifter in progress, they walked out of whatever store, and you've given us a pretty good description as to what that person looks like. At that point, we probably don't have probable cause. We still need to find the person, identify that they're still wearing that clothing, and that sort of thing. So it's not like we can jump out of our car and use any force on them. Keep in mind, force is simply grabbing somebody's arm and saying you're not free to leave. That is a sign of force. Now, that's how we would have done it pre-July 25th. We would have stopped the person, said, you're not under arrest, but you're not free to leave. We're still conducting an investigation. And then we would have had the owner or somebody come and identify the person and do that process. Well, now we're not able to physically stop that person. So what happens and continues to happen is people just don't want to stay. We'll tell them you're not free to leave, but I can't put hands on them because I don't have probable cause in which to hold them. This came true yesterday. In fact, when we had a gentleman that was called in as a suspicious person in the bushes outside of a business. And we contacted him and found out that he had a felony warrant for his arrest. Well, in order to make an arrest, we have to clarify with dispatch that the warrant is still valid. And that process takes a little bit of time, maybe a minute or 2 minutes. And within that time, that person was not going to stick around, nor could we use force because we didn't have probable cause to arrest him. So he walks away from us, and we finally get confirmation from dispatch that we can arrest him. We go back, we recontact him now. He's even more agitated because think about this, that the first time we contact him, we let him walk away. So his belief is he's not under arrest. Now we recontact him, say you are under arrest, you're not free to leave, and the fight is on. And so he fights with one of our officers and we're able to take him into custody. And so those are just real examples of what's happening because of the way the laws were written. I don't think the legislatures want us to do this and want us to have these kind of things. I really don't, or go through these type of things. I just think that there was poor communication in the way things were done. All right, so when can you use force? Here's your education as an officer. You now can use force in these 4 specific situations to protect against criminal conduct. We're not exactly sure what that means, but it kind of means while effecting an arrest, even though they separated those 2 things. Preventing an escape. An escape is literally a legal term under the RCW, somebody escaping from jail, not just somebody running from a store. That's not an escape. And the last time you can use force would be to protect against an imminent threat. These are the 4 times that we can use force. Oops, did I go back? Let's see what I got. How about that? Are you on my present? Yep, okay. So what is this imminent threat situation, right? Why is it take an imminent threat to use force? Well, imminent threat is all 4 of these things. They have to have the present apparent ability, the opportunity, the intent to immediately cause death or serious physical injury to a peace officer, themselves, or somebody else. Why is this important? Now think about this in the sense of a suicidal person, okay? Suicidal person is, it's not a crime to be suicidal, so it does not fit that we're going to make an arrest. It is not an escape. It is not criminal conduct. So it doesn't meet any of those three. The only one it can fall under, if we're going to take them into protective custody, is this fourth one, this imminent threat situation. And in order for it to be an imminent threat, it has to be so serious that it's going to be immediate death or serious bodily injury to themselves, the peace officer, or somebody else. So what this has done, and I know it gets confusing, but what this has done, it's eliminated a whole category of people. It's eliminated that person that says, hey, you know what? Once I leave here, officer, I'm going home and I'm going to take a bottle of pills and kill myself. Pre-July 25th, we would have held that person and said, based on your threats, we're going to have you evaluated. We want somebody to talk to you. We think it's the right thing to do. Now, today, we can't stop that person. You can't use physical force. I can't put an arm on them. I can't escort them. I can't do any of that. I can ask them over and over again, but I can't do any of those things that we think are right to do. That makes sense? Too much, too fast? Got to have all of them. It's not just one, it's every one of them. So this new standard is reasonable care. And what it says is that when possible, and this is a little bit confusing, but when possible, we need to exhaust the available and appropriate de-escalation tactics, okay? So keep in mind, the officer at the scene is going to think about, do I have those 4 reasons to use force, any one of those 4? If I do, then the next thing I have to go through is 7 of the de-escalation things. Okay, can I create distance before I go hands-on? Can I reposition? Can I have a single officer do the communication so that there's no confusion? Can I call for backup? Will that help me? Can I call for additional like mental health? Right? These are things that we normally would do. These aren't surprises to us come before July 25th, but they are now law as opposed to good practice. In other words, if we don't do it, we're subject to a violation of law as opposed to a subject of retraining or a violation of policy or what have you. There's 2 more of those. And those 2 are the ones that are confusing and that you've probably read the most about. Number 6 says, take as much time as necessary without using force. Anybody want to tell me what that means? Because to this day, I don't know. So I'll ask you this. You call in and there's a trespasser inside your store. We tell them, you're trespassing. You're now under arrest, right? So we can use physical force because we've met the you're under arrest standard. But now we jump into those 7 de-escalation. You haven't seen number 7 yet. 7 de-escalation things, and I get to number 6 in my head. And it says, take as much time as necessary without using force. So if it's possible, meaning your store's not closed, right? And it's appropriate, how long do you want me sitting in your store with this person before I take them outside, put them in handcuffs? Well, right now, we don't know. It'll be up to the lawyers and case law to figure out what that actually means. But again, you know, I've got officers with a lot of experience and little experience, and we're all still trying to figure out exactly what this means. And then there's this one. Oh, sorry. Yeah, here's my other question. How about this person is sitting blocking the boulevard? They've shut down the boulevard, so it's a disorderly conduct. They're blocking traffic. How long do I wait? And what the lawyers have told me is, not just me, but other chiefs, is if you can block the road and detour traffic, then you will do that. As opposed to use force, grab this person, take them out of the street, and take them to jail or whatever facility they need to go to. And then there's this one. But leave the area if there is no threat of imminent harm and no crime has or is being committed. Another little bit of a confusing thing here, but we get lots of calls for this person's suspicious. Once we get there, if the suspicion isn't criminal and they are not a threat to themselves or another to immediately cause death or serious physical injury, the law tells us that we need to leave the area, which is strange to me. It's not what we're used to doing. Okay, So that is the de-escalation part. There's 7 of those. Now there's the other components that talks about the characteristics of the person. I'm not going to go into these, but it's a whole nother category that we are supposed to look at and help us determine whether force is appropriate or not. So think about this, those 4 things the officer has to consider, then with 7 things with de-escalation, and then I think there's 8 of these before they can take action. And we need to be able to answer to all of these. It's a pretty confusing situation that we're in. All right, here's the fun part. Hopefully this will work. You all get to be a police officer for a day. Now, I've had counsel or others push back on me and say, you know, you've got more training than we do in this. And the fact of the matter is that we're what, 3 months, 4 months into this. So our training in this is relatively new as well. So yeah, you've gotten training today in the first 15, 20 minutes we've been talking, but we're going to go through this. You get called to a domestic violence call at a house. That's the call you're going to. And so we're going to watch this. Here we go. Hopefully it'll work. Oh, that's not right. Okay, everybody see that? You see the video clip? Good. All right. So this is what you've got. Everybody hear a female voice would sound like most likely a female voice and a male voice, right? There seems to be an argument. You've stepped in the front door of the residence, which you are allowed to do. And the question becomes, has a crime occurred? Are you witnessing a crime at this point? The answer is no. You cannot tell me you have probable cause to make an arrest. Do I believe that there's something going on here? Yes, but I don't have enough to say, stop, you're under arrest. So there will be no arrests being made, and there is no escape, and there is no imminent threat because, again, there's no present apparent ability, opportunity, intent for immediate death. Okay, so force is not authorized at this point in time. All right, here we go. Here, watch the whole thing again. We'll give you a little bit more. Okay, so now I'll tell you that you do have a crime that's occurred, right? I don't know if it's a domestic violence. I don't know what the relationship is between these 2 people, but I know that he's holding her and it looks like against her will. So I've established enough that there is a crime that's occurred, which means there is going to be an arrest that's going to be made. Force is authorized, necessary force, reasonable force, right? There is no escape. Question is there an imminent threat? And the reason I ask this is the imminent threat is also the category we need in which to use lethal force. So at this point in time, there is no lethal force authorized because we have no idea that he has an ability, an opportunity, intent to immediately cause death. Okay. So then after we've determined we can make this arrest, then we're going to have to go through, again, those 7 pieces of de-escalation and then the 8 characteristics to see if any of those will help us and reduce the amount of force we're going to use, or maybe not have to use force at all. You get something that none of us get. You get a 3rd shot at the same scene. So the first thing I'll say is that I realize that this is extreme, but it is a 12-second runoff. And if you think about it, I mean, again, I've been a police officer for 30 years. Had I walked in that front door, the minute he started to take her down that hallway is when I would have tried to use force to stop him, because I know that if I've identified myself as a police officer and he's trying to move her to a different room, that probably is not good based on my training and experience, right? He's not listening to my commands. So I would have done that. In this case, the officer is not able to do that. And I would argue that even at this point, up until that second where that firearm is pulled out, which is way too late to react, the officer is not able to use force because they're still in their mind going through de-escalation and the other characteristics. And this is where I, as a chief, oppose some of this stuff because I think it becomes dangerous. I realize that we are trying to protect suspects and protect their rights, and that's absolutely what we should do. But I think that we've also forgotten about innocence, the innocent civilian here, and the officers. I think that we've missed that as well. So the Training Commission, in their infinite wisdom, said, you know what, we realize that this stuff is difficult. So we're going to give all of the officers, there's 11,000 of us in the state of Washington, a formula that will help them out. And here's what they sent. That is our formula to use. So I'll tell you that cops are good with acronyms. I knew what PLUOF is because I knew that that was police lawful use of force. And of course, there's your equal sign. And I knew that that was totality of circumstance. I had no idea what any of these others were. None. I had to read just like everybody else and try to figure this out. But what they're saying is police use of force equals the totality of circumstance, quantum of force that is necessary. I didn't know what that meant. Proportionality, the government interest, plus the pace, management, and probable cause of the situation. So they gave us this formula, if you will, and then that they gave us that this is the test we should use before we use force, basically. And I still struggle because it's just not clear. I don't know what the governmental interest is. And really what it means is if the person is quote unquote just shoplifting, then that's a way lesser crime to use force, and officers should probably choose not to use force. The problem is that we are now categorizing crimes, and the officer has to determine, well, is a theft first really important? How about a robbery? Which crime is it that I can use force and which one can I not use force? And we're setting our officers up for failure because every one of these can be argued. You can argue them either way. And it makes it difficult for an officer to defend themselves. So early on, when you saw law enforcement agencies pushing back, it was because of these sort of things. There was mass confusion, and we felt like we had no direction. I will tell you that I don't know how many, it had to be 100 hours of webinars and training I was in over this stuff. We had 3 of probably the brightest attorneys that deal with law enforcement issues in the state of Washington, and they disagreed. This is what they do their whole life is law enforcement issues, and they disagreed. They were from different parts of the state and big agencies, and they didn't know what to tell us. And so if they don't know what to tell us, I'm not sure how chiefs and officers are supposed to figure some of this stuff out. It's that difficult. So again, here's my confusion slide. I won't go into all of it, but you know, drafting policies very quickly and trying to implement training, it's a recipe for disaster. We try not to do that. We try to make sure that people are thoroughly trained. The other thing is that just so you know, from a city standpoint, we knew that what this was going to cost. And so we pulled together the mayor, the administrator, the city attorney, and the fire chief and his command staff. And we also met with all of the firefighters and all of the paramedics. We talked about this and said, look, if the police department is not able to do this, what can you do? And have them backfill places that we weren't able to fill in. We also wanted to let them know that there were certain things that we just couldn't go to or respond to. And I think that things have worked out pretty well as far as that's gone. Are we delivering the level of service that I want to deliver? No. Are we doing the level of service within the laws? Absolutely we are. And so the push now is that we need clarification and maybe some law changes so that we can do our job better. Questions about all that stuff? There's a lot of stuff too. All right, we'll power on. A couple of cases we're going to cover here. The Blake decision is the decision that basically has made heavy drugs, I'll say heavy like your cocaine, heroin, methamphetamine, legal to possess. There was a case that came out. The Supreme Court ruled that there had to be a knowingly language in the law that wasn't there. The legislators could have added that knowingly law, and we could have kept things status quo, if you will, but they chose not to. They decided that they were going to say that, you know what, instead of making possession of these drugs a felony, what I want to do, or what they want to do, is make it a misdemeanor, but only after the person has been given at least 2 opportunities at some sort of service. The issue here in Skagit County is that we have no way of tracking services and we have nowhere to send them. There's services out there, but I don't have anybody that the city of Burlington is contracted with that I can give to this person and say, oh, go to this service that they'll take care of you. So in my opinion, I don't necessarily disagree that maybe our drug policies need to change. The problem is that they didn't create the backside, the support side of this before they changed the law side. And interesting enough, just Monday, we got a letter they hand delivered to us from a gentleman that we arrested earlier this year for possession of drugs. And he told us that he looked at his arrest date as his actual save date. He felt that we saved his life because he wasn't going to do it. And going to jail gave him the opportunity to wake up, sober up for a bit, and decide that he was making poor life choices. And I'm not saying that it works for everyone, but there is a point that sometimes an arrest is an effective way in which to deal with people. And so I think that we always need to have that tool. So there's still a lot of work that needs to be done on this, but if you hear an officer say drugs are legal, that's kind of what this means. We don't have a system set up in which to even go after the misdemeanor charges of crime for drug possession. The other big one that you've all noticed, and it's great that Tina's here, is a case called Martin V Boise. It came out in, I think, 18. In 19, it was sent to Supreme Court, or Supreme Court decided they weren't going to look at it. They thought the decision made by the Ninth Circuit was a good decision. And basically, it is a decision that says that homelessness is not a crime. You no longer can punish people for being homeless. And in fact, government entities, if you want to enforce your camping ordinances and your sit and lie kind of ordinances, then you need to first offer somebody housing. And if they refuse that housing, then you can take some sort of action with that. So this is kind of one of the things that spearheaded the Skagit First Step Center. Mayor Sexton really took this and ran with it. Early on, he brought Tina in, who's been an absolute wonderful partner. The city would have never got, well, the county, actually, all of us would have never got to where we were without her and her staff. I will tell you that there was concerns from even me and others that, you know, what was the facility going to bring? What kind of issues would we have? And the answer has been none. Maybe 2 calls for service down there early on, but other than that, we have not had issues. I think that our streets are a lot cleaner than they were. Again, do we have room for improvement? Absolutely, we do. But we are in a better place than at least we were a year ago. So there's that. The other decision that came out here, I think just in August, maybe September, was a case out of Seattle. And Seattle had towed or impounded a vehicle, and it went to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court said, you know, this gentleman was living in his vehicle, so therefore it is his domain, and the fines that you've assessed by towing his car and impounding it are excessive. And so therefore, yes, you can still impound vehicles, but you need to be careful what the fines are going to be. Well, the issue becomes is cities will go broke if we're not able to pass on the charges that we get from tow companies in which to tow cars. And it's $200 or $300 to tow a car. Well, in this case, that $200 or $300 was excessive because of, I believe it's Mr. Long, but because of Mr. Long's income, it just didn't work for them. So there's a change around our Hulk vehicles and how we do those as well. Quickly covering some of the laws that are coming in 22. So again, these were passed in 2021, but they didn't have an effective date until 22. And you're going to see Burlington, I think most agencies in Skagit County now have body cameras on all of our officers. The reason for that is there is a requirement under new law that we audio record all juveniles for any juvenile offense, criminal offense, and any adults that have committed or allegedly committed a felony offense. So the proper way for us to do this is through a body camera system. So we're implementing a body cam system. We also need to interview, if we have these people at our facility or at the jail, then it has to be both audio and video recorded. And again, our cameras should be here in about November, and we'll be ready to go by the effective date in January. So if you hear officers walk into your business and say, I'm recording, you'll now know that they're wearing a little black box on their front of their uniform, and it's because of that law. The other law that came out, it's going to be impactful, is that juveniles cannot waive their rights in any way, shape, or form without consulting with an attorney. So again, we read people the Miranda rights that you hear on TV, right? You have the right to remain silent, on and on and on. Or let's say we ask permission to search a car, that sort of thing. Before doing any of that, we have to put the juvenile in contact with an attorney. I don't necessarily disagree. The issue is going to be, this is going to be very cumbersome because I think the state's defense attorney office, or whoever that is, I think they've greatly underestimated the number of calls they're going to get. Someone told me that they're expecting about 6,000 calls a year. I would imagine that it's going to be a lot higher than that. So we'll see how quickly we're able to get through and get our juvenile offenders in touch with an attorney. There was another law on data collection. In my letters to our legislators, I supported this bill. I think it's the right thing to do. And in fact, what I said to them was, shouldn't we collect the data and information on officer use of force first and then do the laws? And I didn't get a response to that, but it really made more sense to me. It's like, let's go figure out what the problem is, if there is one, and then figure out what the solution is, and then let's implement that solution. So again, totally supported this, this data collection. It'll be more work for us. Again, Burlington has, I think we have 7 uses of force is what we had last year. So it's not a huge endeavor for us, but I look forward to seeing what the data results are after the collection. There's an officer certification bill that comes through the Training Commission. It just expands the role of the Training Commission. Again, not necessarily a bad thing, because I think there was some agencies that probably were not taking certifications away from officers or recommending that they be taken like they should. And so it's just kind of a keep the agency in check sort of thing. It was not an issue for Skagit County. I don't believe any agency in Skagit County had an issue with this. I think there's a couple agencies in the state that probably drove this legislation. There's another law that came out. I had some hang up with this one. This is a new department or division that was established in the state. It's funded by a $26 million budget impact, and their focus is to determine which law enforcement use of force cases they want to investigate. Again, I already explained to you that there was 35 in 2019, there was 34 in 2020. That's a lot of money, as I look at it, to investigate those limited cases. But again, I don't make those decisions. I just get to give an opinion. So there's this new office that will be established next year. Final thoughts. Here's something that's been in our policy manual since my time when I arrived here in 2017. I've always stressed to our officers that we are public servants. We serve our community. That's what we do. My problem with these laws are they were dictated from Olympia. Even though we have representation here in Skagit County, they were dictated at a state level, telling us what we were going to do in Burlington. And I didn't feel like our community had much input. I would have preferred that our community come up and decide how we're going to police our community. The last part of this is that last piece. Officers had to understand that even though we've got the right to do things, doesn't always mean it's the right thing to do. So we look at every situation and we make a determination based on that. Some of these laws are going to change our approach with some of that, which I'm not pleased with, but I can assure you that we will continue to do the best we can for all of you. And with that, I've gone through every slide as rapidly as I could, and you're probably tired of hearing from me. Questions, comments?
I have a question. I'm curious about speeders. What is going on with pulling people over for speeding?
Is it happening, as you're asking? If you're asking,
Yeah, is it happening? It just seems like people are driving really fast and really crazy.
So the answer is no. Not that we put that out publicly, but here's the problem. 57% of my shifts in 2021 were not fully staffed. 16% of those shifts only had 2 officers working. So you can imagine our calls for service since 2010 have continued to increase. I have no new staff in which to absorb those calls for service. And so things fall by the wayside. And I've been very open and honest with some of the decision makers that proactive policing is one of those. And one of those that falls by is speeding. We don't see officers set up running radar like they once did because they're either documenting a case they're on or they're going to a call for service. There's very little free time our officers have. Not the answer you want to hear, but it's as honest as I can give you.
So that's not like a new law. I had heard that, you know, it's a law that they can't, like State Patrol can't pull people over for speeding or anything like that. I mean, I just don't see.
Yeah, no, there was a proposed law that was going to take away like traffic stops for taillights, tabs, license plate lights, some of those, what they called minor infractions. And they were going to remove those so that officers couldn't even stop for those. And that law didn't make traction, but it's going to be reproposed in 22. So I fully expect that that's coming next year.
Thank you.
Yep.
Mike, what as a store owner, I just heard the news today that Macy's in San Francisco are closing 5 stores for shoplifting. What protection do we have? Because it happens, and is there a limit? Like if they take $1,000 or 500, or I know we've always said call the police. We're not going to run after them because that doesn't work. We've done that, and that's not good.
No, it's not good, Mr. Stowe. You're absolutely right. I still want you to call the police.
Good.
What happened in San Francisco, it was Walgreens, and it was so bold that people would go in there with big garbage sacks and just load up, right, and then just leave. Yeah. And I think what happened with that police department is it really doesn't even register as a call for service to them. For us, you know, we'll get to you. It might take time depending on the day, but we still want to have that information for several reasons. One is we document it. We can then look at cameras and see if we can identify the person, right? The other thing is that if we know multiple items have been stolen and we serve a search warrant somewhere, we'd like to know kind of what that stuff is that we're looking for. So it's good information for us to have. Will I tell you that the person's going to be held accountable every time? No, I can't guarantee that. Also, Skagit County has implemented a community court system where they're taking some of these offenders and trying to say, okay, the reason you're offending is because you need services in this area. And they're really trying to get to the root cause, which I think is an admirable thing. But again, in order for somebody to get into that community court, they need to go through us in an arrest of some kind or a report being sent up. So continue to call us. Don't give up on us yet.
Thank you.
And thank you, Chief Luvera. I enjoyed this, and it does give us a little bit more information that we do need to know what and why, because I have seen on Skagit Breaking that there were times where people were complaining that stuff wasn't being done, and I see that officers and you guys have to get on and explain yourself why you didn't finish a chase, why you didn't do this, why you didn't do that. And it really does come down to the fact that these new laws have really tied your guys' hands on a lot of things. So it's very good to hear that you want to do this and you just have certain protocol that you have to follow.
Absolutely. We've got a very good group of officers at Burlington. We want to keep them motivated. And again, we all get into this in order to make a difference. And that's what we want to feel like we're doing. And so we just have to redirect their efforts in a different fashion and try to clean up some of the again, unintended consequences that occurred from some of the language and legislation. Mm-hmm. So thank you all for having me. I appreciate it.
Yes, and thank you.